It's not the Feinstein with Hasidic nurses' notes, home movies, and you ever try to make a movie at home? You have to look at what's behind you and what's in front of you. And, anybody traffic? So anyway, I think I found a place for now. Couldn't go outside; it was very noisy. So welcome back. This is the 28th of April. Excuse me, it's the 15th of April, and the 28th of the month of Nisan, which will be finishing soon, and we come into the month of ER. As I mentioned before, this is called a period between Passover and the month of Shavuos, the Feast of Weeks, and it's called the Sphira, time of Spheres, where we count the Spheres. One definition is counting the days between the two holidays, and it's also the it's called Spheres of Omer. Omer was a measure of wheat that would be brought in the base of Mikdash. Sphere is also circles. So I might title this Going Around in Circles. So anyway, so I'm bringing this up, the subject today, uh, basically in accordance with what's being presented in the Torah portion for this week, which is called, there's a double portion called Tazria and Mitzora, and it deals with spiritual impurity. So if anybody was interested in becoming Jewish, you have to know that not only is there mitzvahs to do, things to learn, and there's also a concept of spiritual impurity as opposed to physical impurity. And I bring that up for a couple of reasons. Is that it's a tremendous amount of information and a lot of laws in the Torah, especially dealing with the great temple in Jerusalem when we had it, and who could visit and who could, you know, perform in it, like not like audio, like a entertainment performance, but service of the priests, and people would come and make from atonement and get thanks offering and peace offerings, and so on and so forth. So impurity, spiritual impurity, had a tremendous place in the Jewish culture, and even in today to a certain part. And a few things are still very, very current and very relevant, and very involved. So it's a facet of Judaism a person may not see if they're thinking about conversion. It's very intricate and very involved. So the one of the situations which causes spiritual impurity is called in English or say Hebrew is Metzora. There's many more in the Hebrew text, other things that can cause it, but this is basically translated as leprosy. So I want to make this point because there's a medical, Western medical such condition called leprosy, and there's a translation of the Jewish term Metzora for leprosy, which is a spiritual impurity, and both are very different. They affect the skin, but in different ways. There could be a whole list of comparisons. One time I had this, as a nurse, I had to sit through an in-service in a place where people were not familiar with the Jewish culture or religion much at all. But the presenter thought he was familiar, and he was saying that in his religion that purity or leprosy was something that couldn't be cured. It only could be cured by certain individuals who had certain powers. And in ridicule, he said that the rabbis seem to claim it comes from improper speech, tale bearing, evil speech, which happens to be correct. So I'm not going to religious comparison of both, but they're both very different. And the spiritual impurity can be cured. has many, many interesting implications. I'll try to go over some. And how is it related to Noahide specifically? That in actuality, um, I don't say you have the first line of the first seven mitzvahs of the Noahide code, but as you know, or may know, there's other related mitzvahs included, but they don't have the implications of that seven. One very, very important mitzvah that the Rebbe Lubavitch emphasized, and we still emphasize, is charity. And it produces peace among people, between man, and also man and God, because a person who is destitute, as I heard from someone, again, from another religion, that, not that I'm calling Judaism a religion, but from another person, is that desperate people do desperate things. So by giving a charity, that we really are fulfilling, in part, some of the mitzvahs where people won't steal and people won't murder or do any other desperate thing. So getting back to the other reasons for presenting this, how they get related to the seven mitzvahs with the evil speech is called, which is called lashon hara, is that it will cause three people to be injured. And how is that three people? Who are the three people? One is the person who's speaking it, which I don't think it takes much imagination to contrive how that's going to affect a person's well-being. The second is the person who's listening to it, because it's going to create a bias in himself, making judgments. His relationship to the person he's hearing about hasn't been proven. The person hasn't been convicted. It has no evidence, and could damage a very meaningful relationship. And finally, to the person that's spoken about, who's not even there to defend themselves. And why do I say that it's related to this inyan, or this concept of spiritual impurity? Because this leprosy, it's saras, is designated as a result of evil speech. Again, we call lashon hara, and this is dealt with depth and depth. I mean, I think in many cultures, and in Judaism especially, there's a book published, famous throughout the Orthodox circles, called "Guard Your Tongue" or "Shemiras HaLashon." By an author was given the name Chavetz Chaim. That wasn't his name, but that's how he went by. Very extensive details of the effects and the implications and the descriptions of this evil speech. And Tanya, emphasizes that evil speech is not necessarily a lie. A lie is a lie, falseness. Evil speech could be the truth, but it's something that should not be presented about other people, um, except it may be maybe a court situation or some other critical matter. So, talking about other people, and even if it's the truth, is a very harmful thing. And as they learn in the Torah literature from examples, especially the example which I'll describe now, and it's it's not exclusively from this book I'm going to present, but it's a really primary source. It's called Maimonides, the Mishnah Torah. This is a translation of just one of the books, and Purity. I don't know if it comes out in reverse or what with this video. And this is one of many, many volumes. And he makes a very interesting summation about this. I have to put a sign up for myself to turn off my cell phone before recording. Anyway, so I'm going to read an excerpt from this book because you'll understand. It says the Torah warns about this lashon hara. It says, take care regarding the tsaras blemish, the leprosy blemish, and remember what a God, your Lord, did to Miriam. That Miriam was all right. Well, you'll see. Now, this was the Torah was implying. Contemplate what happened to the prophetess Miriam, Aaron, and Moses' sister, was a prophetess. So great status. She spoke against her brother Moses. Okay, this is the problem. But she was older than him, an older sister. Certain privileges, an older sib, and she raised him as a child and helped in the phone in the home. And she also endangered herself to save him from the sea when the Pharaoh's daughter came to check out the little ark that they'd built for him to be in. And she really wasn't speaking evil of him. If you know the text, they would, and the commentary, she was talking about his situation, comparing him to other prophets and some of the things which affected his family life as a result of his status. And the other prophets hadn't done that. And that was enough to flip the switch that Hashem, was really angry with her for speaking anything was even related to the negativity in Moses. And Moses wasn't even perturbed about it, because it says Moses was the most humble of all men. Can you imagine? What is the definition of humility? Moses was powerful enough to overthrow Pharaoh. He was powerful enough or great enough to have a conversation with God and to produce miracles. And nevertheless, he was not arrogant. How can you pull that off? The explanation is that he realized his power, he realized his abilities, and he realized it was from Hashem. He also felt that if somebody else had this opportunity or the opportunities that he had, they probably would have done better than he did. So this is a kind of a template for humility. Outside of this, it's very hard to really put a hand on the word and concept of humility. All right, we're going forwards. So we're he's gonna complain. How would you say? Rambam's going to explain that um, she was punished, and it wasn't even foolish talk, and it was about wondrous matters. So therefore, a person should seek to structure his course of conduct to keep himself away from gatherings and about speaking about things that are of no value, limited value, especially if he has limited knowledge of it. And to the point where the extensive conversations won't lead to anything, except that a person gets more casual and casual about speaking and complaining to the point where he comes to the barrier of perhaps complaining about God and how God runs the world. So with that in mind, there's a algorithm that is speaking for no constructive reason can lead to very destructive reasoning, and therefore, back to the Noahide seven principles, blaspheming God. Person gets upset, he has a situation, and God forbid he would curse God. So this is why Noahide emphasizes that blasphemy is a very, very serious offense on the Noahide principles. And coupled with that is the belief in God, which comes almost directly from not having other gods. So with these two principles in mind, a person has to incorporate them in his being, so that when situations come up where his emotion or distorted logic or be influenced, he's going to catch himself. And this is why Noahide uh, encourages or requires people to know it. There's certain things where a person can say ignorance is bliss. And these mitzvahs of not having false gods, cursing God, murder, and theft, and destructive, we'll say, family behavior, which is maybe a nice term for what it is, that these things people should know to begin with and should be oriented to and not plead not guilty because of ignorance. That's why I like to often start the meetings with our purpose of recognizing that there's nothing else but God, and God's hand is in everything, controlling everything, except, in a matter of speaking, our choice to follow his teachings and do his will, which at times could require us to subjugate our own will. And as I mentioned, this book, Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, it does say this: put God's will before your own will, so that He will put you in front of the will of others. So going forward, that again, lashon hara, evil speech, even though it's not listed as a primary Noahide law, can easily lead to breaking the laws. And another point to imply is that even though I mentioned that evil speech doesn't have to be a lie, um, it doesn't have to be totally evil. It could hint at things. And people go around telling people about situations, true or not true, gossipers. That all these things have tremendous bearing on the welfare of community and peace in our relationship with God. And to emphasize that if a person would embarrass a person in public, or considers that in a spiritual manner, and I don't mean hidden, mystical spiritual, but I mean it's a matter of actually shedding blood. A person doesn't go to court for it, except maybe defamation of character or slander, but not for actual murder. But it's considered as devastating as murder. And I guess to hook it up again with Noahide, that we try to, with courts of justice, prevention is a not most important aspect of that. Preventing crime, preventing injury, preventing conflict. So, with following these laws, it's not hard to see how we can make it easier on the legal system by not speaking ill of others. I might say that rewind to the beginning of this presentation. One of the reasons that I chose to be involved with it, I took an interest in it, is because I grew up in a coal and steel town in Western Pennsylvania, and it had a very limited Jewish population. And needless to say, there are many others who are not Jewish. And although I had many unpleasant reminders from people who about my Jewishness, but I had also very significant positive experiences from people who are not Jewish. To show you a coal and steel town, I worked in the railroad in the summers, in college summers. That's me with the white shirt, and that's my foreman in the gray suit. All right, so going forward, one of my friends in that town who wasn't Jewish, you heard the expression sometimes, some of my best friends are Jewish or some other people. Well, some of my best friends were not Jewish, along with the Jews as well, who were my friends. And one of my friends taught me something when I was young. Remember, I was not a Torah student at that time. Because my mother said um, that if you don't have something good to say about something, don't say anything at all. And I just wanted to comment, and I think I mentioned it before, how wonderful it is to have a parent who has the information and the ability to teach a child a value. And to hear a child say, my father told me, or my mother told me, I think it's a blessing for a child. And I encourage you as parents to, sift through what you've learned in life and present it to your children as a building block. And even though it may not seem totally relevant, it's a bond between the two and may open other conversations, which could be critical. Now, it was the end of this conversation, or like at this presentation, that later in my life, again, before I became religious, I worked for, you would call it a drug rehab program. The director, who was very talented psychiatrist, said in the end, it really is not a drug rehab program. It's a program for people who have problems. But nevertheless, many who came were people who had problems with substance abuse. And there were some that didn't. It was a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week facility, and there was constant activity, constant supervision, and force on responsibilities, gradations from a person who first came in into a person who moved up to the program. And one of the things I heard presented as a ground rule for conduct within the program, because it was very intense and there was interaction and intentional, and to put people in a situation where they really showed who they were, the pressure. With, of course, guidelines with no violence and the like. But one of the rules was, if someone says something to you, whether in a group therapy or in the function of the facility, that if it's true, then use it and grow from it. And if it's false, just let it go by and go forward, because no excuses or no explanations or no rebuttals or rebuttals is not going to change anything. So this was again, I mentioned that you can learn from everywhere, everybody. Usually you'll find the source is Torah, but it may not be the first way you hear it. So this is, I guess, in a way, how I heard it in part from one of my jobs. So going forward, I'm going to briefly go into mention that I plan to try to get some rabbis to speak, make a presentation, or help me on a couple of topics, which are perhaps not directly related to Noahide, but nevertheless relevance to interactions between Jews and people who are not Jewish. And one topic is kashrus, kosher food. At this point where I'm living in Florida, and I lived in New York, I lived in Canada, the kosher industry, food industry, is very big. and it requires interaction between people of all backgrounds, whether it's suppliers, employees, supervisors when in the plant or within the restaurant, people who use use kosher products. I worked in one catering establishment where a certain ethnic group used that exclusively for their weddings and other celebrations. They liked the fact of having kosher food, where there was much more supervision and tracing of where the meat products and others were coming from, strictly supervision. So there are many avenues where, knowing about kosher will facilitate the relationships and the working relationships and the interactions and the benefits for Jew and non-Jew alike. The second one is sophros, which means the position of a scribe. Being a scribe, a trained, certified scribe for Jewish documents is extremely important. And as you know, if you just take a picture or to print from even the most sophisticated reproduction facilities and equipment, it's not kosher. Some of the documents that we need. For example, a mezuzah, the scroll, on the doorposts of a house, you'll see a Jew. And all the cases may look wonderful and tremendously artistic and attractive, but what's inside the case is with the real um, purpose of its being. And it has to be written hand by a scribe with parchment paper and all sorts of requirements. So there, and also the mezuzahs, not the mezuzah, the tefillin, the boxes you may see on the arm and on the head during prayers. Inside those boxes, again, are parchments specifically made, highly technical, highly specific. And of course, the Torah scrolls, when we call the Sefer Torah, or the Torah with the five books of Moses, the two scrolls, the parchment wrapped around them. And the reason I mention that are these things is that to replicate something in Torah, especially these items I just mentioned, has to be very specific, has the person be very skilled, very learned, very God-fearing, highly respected. And the requirements for what can be acceptable as a duplication are very strict. And on top of that, the requirements have been in existence since the day one of the giving of the Torah. And therefore, this in part validates the Torah as an authentic document from way back to the time of Moses at Mount Sinai, the revelation of God in front of nearly 2 million people or more. That to have the Torah transcribed so meticulously is an indication of its validity even today. And not only that, any other literature which is included in the general makeup of Torah literature, which came after the five books of Moses, to be included in what we call Torah, the requirements are very strict. A person can't just, type up an article and send it in and it's published. So even handwritten. So I want to get a scribe to show again the tools of his trade and to describe, what it takes for something to be accepted as Torah literature and to be duplicated. Another area which I may handle myself, I actually wrote a training booklet, is healthcare. Healthcare is a very important facet of Jewish culture or any culture. But we have very, very involved mechanisms in healthcare, and there are many laws that have been considered in healthcare. Um, so I'll go into that at a later time. The final point I want to make today is that I believe that you picked up that learning Noahide is not just, a intellectual pursuit with, of course, satisfaction, which can learn. But I don't want to be a Bible school teacher. I want to see, God willing, that Noahide evolves into a functioning nation, cadre, that has an ability to add to the world's and God's plan for the world to be a dwelling place for him, to recognize him with the, leadership of the righteous Messiah, Mashiach. So if anybody's in the South Florida area and you want to try to develop a class, interaction um, firsthand that we can meet, I do have a place where we can go, and 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 maybe you'll be a template to for Noahide to grow and other places as well. And remembering that when you present Noahide, offer to Noahide, and know about Noahide, you are providing for people who are searching, as many of you yourselves have done, and have maybe rejected past lifestyles or looking to find something new, a new meaning or more meaning, that you're having the Noahide and a place to go provides for these people and that they shouldn't go elsewhere for misinformation. So thank you all. Wish you a good remainder of the week. God bless you.